Hello, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the episode 4 of Leading Your International School podcast. And today we have as our guest from the world's largest democracy, the suburbs of the national capital region of Delhi and the millennium city of Gurgaon, the director principal of Shivnada School, Mrs. Monica Sagar. And before I invite her to introduce herself to our listeners, I was going through a LinkedIn post and something very, very interesting came up. And I couldn't resist sharing that with you. And here it goes. And I'll read out what she said. At the Shivnada school, the term school has a different meaning for us. The word originally comes from the Greek language and means leisure. Leisure time activities, especially involving philosophical discussions. Leisure and philosophy, interesting combination, isn't it? Uh, Discussions during the time of Socrates and Plato. In this spirit, the school for us is a. Now I'll read out the abbreviated word school and its full form. Sensitive, S, and child-centric, C, environment, fostering critical inquiry, which is like a home away from home, where the children develop a love for lifelong learning through observation and experience to be outstanding human beings. I'm sure the word school would now have a very different meaning for all of us. And yes, such an interesting perspective, isn't it? There we go. That's the theme of our episode today. So before and without any further ado, I would like to invite Monica ma'am to please introduce herself. Welcome, Monica ma'am, and over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Vikas. It's been a pleasure talking to you. And I'd forgotten that I'd written that about 10 to 11 years back, when I had just joined Shivnada School. And school has always been for me a very different environment as a student. And I wanted to create a very different environment for students, somewhere that they would be very happy coming. And yet learning should not be compromised, but learning should happen in a very fun way. And it would make them think of things beyond the obvious and develop higher order thinking skills. So I think that's what the definition is trying to convey.
Ma'am, very interesting, Ms. Sagar, when you said beyond the obvious. It's like, and I'm sure you would agree, and listeners also would agree, that when we're looking at making an institution go beyond the obvious, we have to have some very solid perspectives of leadership to look at that. So my first question is, what is your leadership perspective?
My leadership perspective is that a leader has to be a guide by the side and not a sage on the stage, just like the recent definition of an educator or a teacher is. So the leader is also like a coach, a mentor, a guide by the side, and has to go through the same experiences as the team for everyone to come together cohesively. They have to help the team when they need their help, and they have to let go and trust the team when it's time to let go. So, striking that balance is the most difficult for new leaders, because suddenly in the throes of a new position of leadership, people become over enthusiastic about taking all decisions, and making sure that they are in the middle of everything. So for a new organization to be set up, a new school to be coming up, I think a lot of focus has to be on culture building. So a lot of conversations, dialogues, discussions, readings are important to build that culture. And the leader has to then decide where to step in and where not to step in as the time goes by.
I think it's very obvious, and it comes out very well, that how easily things you've adapted to change. Because if we go back and see what schooling and education used to be, and as you very rightly said, not the sage on the stage, but the guide by the side, and the fact that you have to build a culture. I think these are two very important things which were not always the center of things as far as schools were earlier concerned, but now yes. So if this is your leadership perspective, how did you arrive at it? Is it a personal journey, or is it that you've experienced it, or somebody's been a mentor to you, guided it? How did you arrive at this perspective?
So like they say that you are a parent, sometimes like your parent, and sometimes in spite of your parent.
Right.
Because you are a rebel and you want to do something totally opposite to your parents. Similarly, as a leader, when you're not in a leadership position, you come across so many leaders you've been led by, and you assimilate a lot of things from each one of them, and you develop your own leadership style. It also, depends on your value system, on your personality, on your experiences, and who your role model is that you consider. Who would you like to emulate? So your own unique leadership style develops according to that.
I think you've led me to my next two questions. So who's been your role model, and how have you, any particular experiences which actually shaped these things? So let's take it one by one. Any role models you can think of, or any one person, or I mean, either way.
I grew up in a convent school, which was very, very strict. And I distinctly remember, like, when I'm saying very strict means we were also caned when we did not follow the rules. There was this thin cane, which sisters, I believe they used to say, we've got it from Karnataka, and they would use that on us. If you don't get a notebook, you don't listen to instructions and all that. But there was one principal who came in, like we've had many principals. So one principal, she was really tall, Sister Miriam. And I distinctly remember when I was about, I think 6 or 7 years old, when she was almost, for me at that point of time, she must have been 6 feet or above. I don't know. I mean, she might well be 5'6" or 5'7" or even lesser. But for my 6-year-old self, it was someone very, very tall. And she would bend down, she would sit down and meet our eyes at the same level, and then talk to us. So I remembered that. I thought that was the kindest thing to do to a child, that you don't talk from a position of authority, and you would get down to the level of the child. And similarly, I think in all her interactions, not that she would, with adults she didn't do that, but she would listen more and talk less. So one of my role models would be she as our principal. She stayed there, I think, maybe for 5 years, and we got another principal. But I've never forgotten her. And when I ask my friends from school or my cousins or my sister who was studying with me, we all remember Sister Miriam, because she was the kindest. Even if she had to scold us, she would first tell us what we'd done wrong. And she never used a cane on us, while all other principals before and after, and many nuns also did use. But she never used it. She would just tell us the logic behind why what we'd done was wrong, and she would ask us to reflect. So I think somewhere she's been my role model. But otherwise, when I started working, and I've only worked in schools, different leaders, you pick up different things from different leaders. Mrs. Adams was the principal at my at one of the schools I was teaching, which was the Sri Ram school. And I loved the way she was so comfortable communicating with everybody on the public forum, which I used to be extremely scared about. I was very anxious as a public speaker. I was always in the singing and dancing group in schools or in the racing groups, and public speaking was not my domain. So I idolized her, and I tried to emulate and, try to use her methods of speaking, where she would put everyone at rest by the words, by the choice of words. And she never shouted. She was very calm. In fact, on the mic, she would go even calmer, if we could say that. She would use the bass of her voice more than the treble. So that's where you pick that up, that immediately it had a calming effect. Then I worked with another principal, which is Mrs. Leena Prajit. Leena was a very, very intelligent and wise principal. She was academic. She was very intuitive. She understood. She looked around the bend, so she could foresee what would happen. So she was very intelligent as a leader. So there's a lot of learning that I had from her. And I think many colleagues I've seen who been in leadership positions, and you pick up something or the other from all of them. Yeah.
So I think empathy, role model, walk the talk. I mean, and empathy and walk the talk, which stand out for me from the experiences which you just said. And yes, I think these were very, very interesting and different experiences. Now, as an international community and as community of international schools, we might have different real life situations or different ground situations for each setup and each campus and each requirement. However, I feel that one common thing which all binds us together is the student outcomes, isn't it? So how can we ensure that as leaders we arrive at different perspectives that can aid our international schools and student outcomes?
So each individual, each employee, each educator will have a different perspective, a different focus. Similarly, each leader will have a different perspective and different focus. But the whole part of coming together as a team is that whatever your perspective is, you try to create a win-win out of that situation. And the goal has to be aligned to student learning outcomes. And a lot of conversation around student learning outcomes have to happen. I remember when we started the Shivnada school, I joined when the school was just completing the first year of K to 5. So it was nursery to 5. There were about 7 grades and we had about 270 odd students. And I joined in February, whereas the next session was starting in April. So February and March, I just observed. I went into each and every class. I made sure I observed each and every teacher. There were, I think, a handful of teachers at that point of time, perhaps 20 or 21 teachers. But I knew everyone's style and focus and strengths and weaknesses because I had free time on my hand. The school was very new, just a fledgling. And observing them and helping them grow from there, I knew who to put where. But the discussion that I always did with them was one, asking for their inputs on whatever topic that I wanted to talk about, whether it was culture setting, whether it was the core values. Because as a school, as an organization, all the campuses of the Shivnada school have certain core values. And I feel these core values are critical. So I'm using critical as an acronym again. And critical meaning compassion and respect, responsibility and sense of purpose, integrity, transparency and openness. Then I've added 2 of my own from I and A because they were not there first.
That's interesting. Surely.
C is commitment to excellence, and L is lifelong learning. And the 2 that I added post the pandemic were from I would be an innovative mindset and A, agility, because the pandemic or the COVID has taught us that we need to be agile and adaptable. We can't be living in a stone age, so to say, that we can't say, okay, things here in our school happen only this way. We have to be ready for change. We have to be adapting quickly because time, like change is the only constant in life. Time doesn't stand still at all. Yeah.
Very interesting, Mr. Sagar, when you said that, when you had started, it was observation and to know the strengths and weaknesses of the people you're working with, taking their input, trying to build that culture. And then you've talked about adding innovation and agility after the post-pandemic. Now, having compassion as well. I think all of this requires that you be part of a specific environment for a period of time and then form a connect and then you take the way forward. However, I think across schools, especially in the subcontinent, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but then that's what I've seen, that a lot of international schools use expats as principals, right, as leaders. So do you feel that should international schools be only led by expat leaders, as most international schools tend to do that? I mean,
well, I won't categorize people into locals and expats. I would categorize them into human beings. All human beings are different.
Right.
If I said all human beings are different,
Yes, yes, of course.
whether a person is an expat or an Indian,
Right.
it depends on whether their value system matches that of the organization and what kind of a culture you want set. And what do your parents want? At the end of the day, your parents will send the children to the school if they see value in the leadership and the culture that you're trying to create, along with setting high, lofty goals for the children. And those goals don't have to be academic only. They have to be lofty in terms of a value system, in terms of character building, in terms of sports, co-curriculars, everything. So a balance between all of that needs to be maintained. So whether the parents want an expat leader or an Indian leader, one needs to know that. And we do a lot of surveys. Our management from the beginning, from year one itself, there's an annual parent survey which collects a lot of information from parents about what we are doing, whether they feel it's right, and we value their suggestions. So we are already quite agile and adaptable. We keep our ear to the ground to understand what the parents need, because it's not like the old times that things are set in stone. I remember having a same almanac from grade 1 to grade 10. I was in school till grade 10, and then in my city, there wasn't, the 10+2 system hadn't come. So I did a pre-university in college. So at 15 years, I was already in college. But from grade 1 to grade 10, the almanac design, everything was the same. Even whatever the rules, even the number that the rules, the way they were numbered was also the same. So things didn't change at all in those years. But the present day has shown us that change is something you need to be adaptable to. And just like a corporate is listening to their customers, and customer relationship management has come about in terms of any corporate which is seeking profit. For a school to be successful, you also have to listen to your stakeholders, who are the parents.
Well, that's quite an interesting aspect to look at. And I think before I go into my next question, which is a continuation of this, let me remind my listeners, our listeners who might have joined us late, that, and those who have already been listening, you must have heard a lot of perspectives coming in and out. And I think it's that this theme is one of the chapters called Perspectives on International School from our already published book, Leading International School, which can be now bought from Amazon, Flipkart, Kindle, and Apple as well. Moving forward, ma'am, you said stakeholders, right? And you said stakeholders as parents. But I think many times it does happen, and I'm sure you must have experienced this being in the role of a leader, that it's like, how is it that the international school leaders will tend to resolve a difference of opinion from that very important or the most important stakeholder, that is the promoter or the owner of the school? The parents would come after that. But if there is a difference of opinion with the promoter as far as the ideology and the way forward, how do you think that could be resolved?
If the right person has been fitted into the organization, I would say, as a leader, because like Jim Collins says, first get the right people on the bus,
right,
and then decide where the bus will go.
Right.
If that is true for any corporate, it's true for a school also. I think before selecting a leader, a lot of care needs to be taken to make sure that the value system and the goals are aligned with the leader. Otherwise, there'll be a conflict. There'll be a major conflict if the goals are not aligned, if the culture the leader is trying to set is contrary to the culture that the promoters want. And if there is a lot of dialogue between them in the beginning, at least in the first few years, a lot of dialogue needs to happen between the promoters and the leader to understand each other's perspective. And if the promoters sometimes do need to be enlightened, perhaps, into what will make a school work, they need to listen to the leader And the leader needs to listen to what exactly the promoters want. Some schools are, I would say, very profit driven still. And some schools like to create a brand which is really solid and large in the eyes and the ears of the public. So the goals are different for both, and just like a corporate, when you have, you would actually trade off one for the other and try to create a win-win. You have to balance all that out. So is it the results which are important? Is it the value system and the character that you're building for the students important? Or a little bit of both is important? Are you looking at turning out politicians and world leaders from the school, like an Eton or a Harrow? Are you looking at having a school like the UWC, which is looking at contribution to society? So the leader's perspective is aligned, has to be aligned to the promoter's perspective, 60 to 70% at least. The rest can be sorted. A win-win can be reached if 60 to 70% is aligned for both.
I think Stephen Covey is doing a lot. I mean, the win-win comes out a lot many times, and I think his book is straight away quite an inspiration for many of us.
Yeah.
But you very rightly said that it has to be a balance, or it has to be an alignment, 60 to 7%, and then the rest can happen. However, obviously we as humans, each one of us have our own leadership styles. Each one of us have our own understandings and ways of doing things. Now, in order to be able to meet those expectations or the promoter's ideas, and also to be able to, take the rest according to yourself, if I may ask this, that a tough leader will take the school up and a soft leader will bring the school down. Do you agree with this statement?
Not at all.
So, I mean, what's your thoughts on this?
You need tough love.
Okay.
Because while the goal alignment has to happen, there was a very interesting thing I read, that LEAD can be an acronym for what the leader should be doing. So when we talk of LEAD, which is LEAD, it is listen. First, listen to your stakeholders, your team members, your promoters, the parents. So listening is very important. The E stands for engaging with them. Listen to them, engage with them. And A is for aligning them to the goals that are needed to make the school successful. And it's only after you do these three things that you have to start doing something. So the listening, the engaging, the alignment and empowerment to the goals, and empowering your team to, help to give them strategies on achieving those goals. Because you can't really achieve your large, lofty goals immediately. There has to be a time frame. You have to create a Gantt chart, as you say. So what is going to be, even in the school development plan, what is going to be your 3-year goal? How do you break it down to an annual goal? How do you break it down to a termly goal, or a monthly goal, or a weekly goal? That's very, very important. How do you break it down on achieving certain goals? And your SDP is really important. It tells you what you have to focus on, the school development plan, especially.
I think you just very interestingly said that, you have to, in order to transform a school, you need to have this alignment with the SDP. But and it's there in our book as well, that there remains a deep dichotomy between how closely you should place yourself to the school's learning processes, and to what extent you should engage with transformational practices. Because I'm sure you would agree that as a leader, we cannot dissociate ourselves from the learning process. The moment we do that, I think the whole idea of leading goes. But then being at the role in the role where you are, you also have to transform or bring change. And that obviously would be one of the expectations from the stakeholders, whether it's the parents or the promoters. So how do you, this dichotomy, where do we strike this balance? How do you do it? I mean, obviously you also have been in this for more than a decade. You were a founding principal, now you're the director principal. I'm sure you faced this situation where you have this dichotomy. So what suggestions would you give to people who would face this?
So in the beginning, I would say being closely connected with what is happening in the school, in each classroom, not in matters of controlling it, but in matters of pedagogy. For example, our school has a very different constructivist pedagogy based on the universal design for learning. So to ensure that that pedagogical practice is being followed in every class, every instruction that is happening, it's very important, so that, that can be embedded into the system, so that it becomes lifelong learning for the whole team. And keeping your team motivated, listening to them. Like I said, the leader has to first listening to your team, having a one-on-one. When the school was small, I used to have a one-on-one periodically with every staff member. Spend about half an hour to 45 minutes in my office. On a daily basis, I would meet at least 4 staff members at least, so that I would cover all of them and get to know them personally and have that connect. Give them the feeling that I'm here, I have your back. And if you have any issues, you're free to talk to me about them. I would like to continue doing that even now, but I don't have the time, and the team has grown to 300 plus. So, and the middle level leaders are then aligned to do the same and carry the same culture forward. So in the beginning, it's very important to be in the know, to make sure that the pedagogical alignment happens, to make sure that your goals are being met in terms of the value system that the student should have. You should have practices which are important. They should be visible. Like Jenny Mosley said, that they would be visible on the wall. You should have posters saying what is permissible, what is not permissible in the school. That sets a certain amount of culture. And for children and for the team, it's very important to see those around. Walking the talk is important. You could be saying one thing and doing something totally different. Then your team will not get aligned to what you're doing. Your students will not respect you because you say one thing to them, but you're doing something completely opposite, whether it's a teacher or the head of school. So walking the talk is extremely, extremely important. And then slowly and steadily, you will move towards your goal. And if you need to divert in the middle, like during the pandemic, the 3-year plan was something which was put on hold. First, it was like dousing the fire.
Right.
How do we do this? How do we run the school? I remember that the last day before the vacations that year, 2020 March, was around 22nd March.
Right.
And around the 14th or 12th or the 14th March, we realized that schools might just shut down, because it was announced somewhere on the 20th.
Mm-hmm.
And
yes.
so we were just seeing, okay, how many of you are able to take classes on Skype? And many teachers, because we're living in Gurgaon, and sometimes there used to be days where the pollution level was very high, the AQI was really bad. So the government would declare a closure. So teachers, the senior school teachers, had actually learned to do classes on Skype or on
Zoom also.
Google Meet or Zoom.
Google Meet, yeah.
They were already using the free version.
Right.
Also, we had, fortunately for us, a couple of years, like from maybe around 2017 or 18, we had introduced the 1:1 program for 6, 7, 8, where the children were getting iPads and a lot of learning in order to enhance engagement. These children were using 30% of the classes were taken on the iPads and 70% was regular classes without devices. So all these teachers from March 12th to about March 20th, when the school was closing, I think we got them to train each other how to take classes online, how to use those devices. The 1:1 teachers were using things like Nearpod, they were using Padlets, they were using lots of interesting, engaging tools with the children, Quizit, and many more. And so there was a lot of cross-pollination of the middle school was teaching those strategies and techniques to senior school and the early years. And senior school teachers were teaching how to take Zoom classes on Zoom to the middle and others. So we had these mentors teach the teachers program, mentor, mentoring the mentee kind of a
Mentoring the mentee. Yeah.
So amongst teachers.
Right.
And so I think we did open the school on 10th April. We did not delay. I'm sure we didn't do a great job, but we managed to stay afloat. And a lot of discussion happened between the teaching staff across the school, how we could learn from each other. And we started having those Zoom meetings to discuss what strategies would work. And I think that vacation almost went for a toss. We were all at home, and everyone with a device, and any teacher who didn't have a device of their own, although we are fortunate that our school hands out a laptop to every teacher who joins as soon as they join.
Yes.
So we were fortunate in that way. Otherwise, it would have been a difficult, I've heard of schools which had a very difficult time. So I think all in all, we adapted to that change. The first month, while we completed the goal of taking classes online, we weren't very engaging. So that time the school was only from April 10th to about May 10th. We opened it for 4 weeks and we said, we need to close for summer vacations and we'll keep you in the loop. But we had meetings with every grade. I personally spoke to parents of every grade who were very worried that, how long is it going to last? What will happen to our children? Will there be gaps? So all these questions and fears were there. And I think just being accessible to me and to be able to talk to even the middle level leadership and have their fears assuaged in the sense that we're all in this together, don't worry. We will take them where they are at whatever level they are and we'll take them forward. Right now, let's make sure that they're emotionally safe. And that was what we were talking about. And that is how we reached out to them. That, many forwards were coming in. One very nice forward which came in was that we are all in the same storm, but we are in different boats.
Right, yes.
Each one's context was different. Each one's perspective was different because of the context. And but accessibility for all stakeholders with each other and the common collaboration and the willingness to connect and allow them to connect. I think that is what took us forward.
I think, Ms. Sagar, the very fundamental and vital thing which you just said in the last sentence was emotionally safe. I think emotional intelligence, and I cannot hesitate to quote Daniel Gleeman, where he said that emotional intelligence, he believes, is the sine qua non for successful leadership. Do you agree with this? Is
Absolutely.
it? Because we've heard so much about, we're so used to about that IQ every time. But over a period of time, especially the pandemic has taught us about the importance of EQ and AQ. So your thoughts on the fact that, yes, this could be the fundamental of a successful leadership?
Emotional intelligence is extremely important. And the first step of emotional intelligence is self-knowledge. Self-knowledge, self-discipline, looking at a win-win. I will again talk about how Covey talks about private victory and public victory. So first you have to learn to know yourself, discipline yourself, work towards certain goals. Like they say, first things first, and seek first to understand and then to be understood. So I think he's summed up that entire journey of emotional intelligence really well. from private victory to public victory. If you look at all the 7 habits that Stephen Covey talks about,
Right.
and the 7th one being sharpening the saw. So what is the saw? The saw is you, your personality, your entity. And if you don't know yourself and you don't know how to make yourself better and get along better with people around you and take them along with you, you can't be a leader.
I think very important when you said that knowing yourself better, knowing the people around you better, and taking them along with this takes me to that one single very important word called empathy. Please correct me if I'm wrong, because I think we say that empathy is the vital attribute that a leader must have, right? But can empathy be really experienced?
There was this very beautiful activity that many of my teachers do with the children in order to teach them empathy. Okay. I've seen 1 or 2 doing that. They call a child, like when they're talking about empathy,
right?
And the teacher removes her shoes or his shoes and says, okay, get into my shoes. And they try to get into the shoes by wearing their own shoes at first. The students are wearing their own shoes and they try to get into those larger shoes, but they're not able to get in. And the teacher would say, well, what do you need to do before getting into my shoes?
Right.
Yeah, we'll have to take off our shoes. So empathy starts from there.
Right.
Until you absolutely, I think, remove that thinking of only yourself, your self-interest, and only then you can get into someone else's shoes. Only then you can empathize. When you shut off all voices in your head, because invariably what happens is when someone is talking and telling you something, a stray word or a letter or an expression will trigger some memory in your head, and you will start thinking of that rather than listening to the person. And you would start judging the person from your own perspective. And if you switch off everything in your head, that means akin to removing your shoes and then listen to the person, only then can you get into that person's shoes. So that whole active listening mindset of listening and clarifying and repeating and saying that, okay, is this what you mean? Is this what I think you mean? Please correct me if I'm wrong. And summarizing, it's called the mirroring technique, which is used by counselors the world over, that you say the same thing that the person is trying to say and ask them if this is what you're trying to mean, because half the problems and conflicts happen because you have not really removed your shoes before getting into other people's shoes. And because you're not listening, you're hearing with voices in your head, which are contradicting what you're hearing or judging what you're hearing, but you're not really listening. So empathy means active listening.
I think this is a very an awakening kind of description which you've given. And I think when you look at the role of empathy as a leader and role of trying to get into somebody's shoes, knowing the kind of activities, knowing the kind of setup which international schools deal today with, I always wondered whether, because I remember when I was growing up and in my, schooling and the kind of principles I had, there would be the central figurehead, and, they are the ones which are the focus. If they say yes, it is yes. If they say no, it is no. And they are the ones who are doing everything. It's like, one-stop leadership, which is there. So that's the central focus. I don't know whether empathy exists. The word existed at that point in time or not, because everything they were doing, and it was like, it seemed more of a diktat rather than a leadership idea. But having said that, and what I've seen with you, I think, do you feel that every leader or leadership as such should be doing things, should it be centric around the leader, that one single person? Or there's a word which I've often heard, and it's there in our book as well, and I often heard from you as well. It's called distributed leadership or distributive leadership. Your thoughts on its importance, and do you recommend that as a perspective to people?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think this is the age also of crowdsourcing for ideas. With the internet, the World Wide Web, what you have learned becomes redundant very quickly.
Mhm.
Having on your team members who are very diverse across cultures,
Mhm.
diverse across ages,
Mhm.
diverse across experiences, across genders today,
Mhm. Mhm.
is so important to have a balanced view. Yes, when you are faced with an emergency situation like the COVID was, or any other emergency situation, I think at that point of time, you have to take the reins in your hand, meet with the middle level leaders, decide what is the right thing, and quickly come to a decision and move forward on that. But if it isn't a very urgent kind of a decision to be made, then it should be open for discussion and debate amongst a team. And crowdsourcing for ideas always gives you better ideas, because many heads come up with a better solution rather than one head. And you can then, save yourself from any kind of pitfalls. And being open to admit that you might be wrong and retracing your steps and beginning again is also important in certain contexts. The leader is just one person and very fallible, not a demigod. So it's very important to have faith in your middle level leaders, because as the organization grows now, when there were 30 teachers in my team, I did not have coordinators. When that team in the next year grew to 75, I had grade leads. Grade leads, an early years head and a primary head. For middle and senior, there was no head. And
Right.
in the third year, when the team grew to about 100, then there was a middle and senior head also. And in the beginning, we kept these positions rotational so that everybody also gets a taste of leadership, and the team needs to also understand what is it to be like a leader. I know that we had a lot of time on our side. We were not in a hurry, although we were growing very rapidly, because the number of students were growing. Like in the first year, there were about 270. The second year, there were 550. The third year, there were about almost 800. And then we grew to about 1,000. And today we are there are about 2,000 plus students. So we were growing rapidly, but middle level leadership and the distributed leadership that we call it is really, really important as the organization grows. From the beginning itself, rather than putting people in fixed positions, I think for a young organization to continue to have many people in different positions also teaches them, grooms them along the way. And you also have to groom people who you've seen have leadership potential and keep moving forward. As the team grows, you have to have leaders from within. It's very, very.
Absolutely. I think having been with the organization for 7 years, I've seen that internal growth is very, very important. It does happen, and distributed leadership definitely is there. But however, you know, having talked about the leadership roles like a coordinator or a head of department or middle leaders and all those, I think there is one term which I personally felt that if we do not stick to these nomenclatures, and instead of that, of course, these are there as roles and officially we do have those, but if in the essence of it, we can say that they are mentors rather than just being the roles they are leading. Do you feel that uh, by mentorship or using them as mentors and giving them a role of mentors, we would benefit more than they being as roles in which they are per se?
Look, it isn't this versus that. They have to
Okay,
do both together.
right,
They have to be mentoring their team, and they also have to make sure that the goals of the organization are being met,
right,
that whatever they're
absolutely,
working towards is getting done. Our CEO always talks about leadership having three main objectives: first, getting the job done.
Mhm.
Second, keeping the team motivated. And
Right.
third is looking around the bend.
Right.
So you have to not do one at the cost of the other.
Mhm.
You have to do all three together, and you have to balance it out.
Absolutely.
So I think for an international school also, confluences are really, really important. The way our IBDP is functioning, I think every week they have a 1 hour dedicated conference time, and they have their own subject confluences that they have over and above that. But that 1 hour where the whole team comes together and they talk about what is needed to be done, what is, and having a clear calendar of events as well as guidelines in terms of what is acceptable, what is not acceptable, and also a calendar of um, deadlines that have to be met, especially IAs that have to be uploaded, the extended essays that have to be uploaded, or the any kind of internal assessment. So the internal calendar has to be a little earlier than the IB calendar, because you can't be burning the midnight oil and uploading everything. It's not fair on the DPC or the Cambridge coordinator, or the MYP lead, whichever international program the school is running.
I think in the beginning of this recording, you said that you were initially not a very good public speaker. I'm sorry, I don't think that must have been in any case the way you've been communicating. And takes me to my last question. That do you feel communication is one of the keys of having a effective, positive leadership perspective?
Communication is very important in every walk of life, and especially for a leader, because if you're not able to communicate what you're working towards, the team will be very unfocused and confused. So clarity has to be given in terms of how you choose to communicate that. You have to first make it clear in your own head and see what is the way forward, and then discuss it with your distributed leaders, and then keep it open for the other members of staff. And while you've taken some decisions, you should also be open to feedback from them, because at the end of the day, it was they who will be working at the grassroots level. And sometimes they might encounter some issues which you've not been forethought. So being adaptable, agile is important, along with good communication. Good communication is a key, because I've seen, as a teacher, as a student, I have seen a lot of people in leadership who don't communicate very clearly what they want. So it leaves the students, if the teacher is like that, or the team members, if the leader is like that, in a very confused state of mind, and everybody will be doing their own thing. So communication is of utmost importance.
I think when the listeners listen to this episode, I'm sure they would not realize how the time 50 minutes crossed. How did the time go by? Because for me, it was a very, very, even though I've interacted with you so many times and so long, but I think this is a completely in-depth, rigorous, and thought-provoking interaction, which is even equally enlightening for me. And let me conclude by a small few lines from our chapter from the book, the chapter being Perspectives on International School Leadership. International schools are complex organizations that require school leadership to take a three-dimensional perspective, including awareness of leaders, proximity to, and ability to affect learning. A number of different international leadership models do exist and operate, but before moving into any international school leadership role, a prolonged period of professional socialism and deep understanding of your school's cultural context will be critical to your developing relationships that can be used to positively sustain change. So I think with this, I would like to thank you so much, Mrs. Sagar, for being with us and enriching us with this excellent, amazing, interesting perspectives of international leadership and very thought provoking. For our listeners, I would once again reiterate that episode 4, Perspective of International School Leadership, from our published book, Leading Your International School, on our website, as well as the podcast link. Once this podcast is released, I'll be sharing the link on our LinkedIn handles. And until we meet again with our next episode, this is your host, Vikas, signing off. Have a goodbye, take care, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Vikas.